Let me kick off. I'm going to ask the Minister a number of questions, and then there's going to be an opportunity to go to the audience. So if you've got a question, get ready to stick your hand in the air. Let me start with the breaking news that you referred to about adjusting import rules for beef. You referred in your remarks to a decade of assessments and evaluations. The US Department of Agriculture released a statement crediting President Trump for the change and calling it a major breakthrough. To what extent will this change the dynamic with the administration? Will this get us closer to a bilateral trade deal with the United States?
The short answer to that, Michael, is I'm not too sure. What I do know is that 10 years ago, when Barnaby Joyce was the Agriculture Minister, we started this process of reviewing the entitlement of the Americans to import their beef into Australia. And then 5 years ago, under Agriculture Minister Littleproud, we took that a little step forward. And this is now the culmination of that inquiry. We have very strict biosecurity laws, and we apply them very strictly, and that's why so much of Australian produce is disease-free, and we have a clean and green image overseas for our products. The flip side of that, of course, is that if we want to trade with other countries like America, we do $4 billion worth of beef exports to the United States, and it's increasing, by the way. We export huge amounts of beef to China. Again, that's increasing. We've just done a new trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Our beef exports to the United Kingdom are up 500% from where they were. We haven't done this in order to entice the Americans into a trade agreement. We think that they should do that anyway. We think the Americans should honour the terms of our free trade agreement. It's been 20 years since we signed that free trade agreement. It's very clear. All the tariffs that, all the products that come from America come to Australia tariff-free. We expect the Americans to do the same. So my job, the job of the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, is to convince the Americans that they're actually going down the wrong path in terms of applying these tariffs. They're actually counterproductive. They're going to push up inflation and push up unemployment. So however the Americans themselves might view this decision, the fact of the matter is that my job and the job of the government, just as we did with China, we had $20 billion worth of tariffs and other impediments on our goods when we came into government. We sat down and patiently worked through all of those issues. We've got to do the same with the Americans. Whether this is a good or a bad decision from the point of view of the Americans, obviously President Trump thinks it's a good decision, taking credit for it. We have to pursue our national interest, and our national interest is the removal of all of those tariffs.
Well, good luck persuading President Trump on that tariff question, because he has said that tariff is his very favourite word in the Oxford English Dictionary, so you've got a mountain to climb. Can I ask you about the nexus between tariffs and trade and defence spending in the US relationship? You would have noticed last month that when Spain, for example, was the outlier and didn't go to 5% defence spending, that's 3.5% on core defence and 1.5% on defence-related investments, President Trump threatened they would have to spend twice as much in tariffs to make up for it. Have you encountered that connection in your discussions with the Americans between defence spending and tariffs?
No. Well, you might recall in the course of the early part of the Trump administration, Mr. Dutton, leader of the opposition, Dutton, sought to link defence and trade and said we should throw the defence relationship in with the trade relationship. The Prime Minister was very clear, we would not do that and we will not do that. There's two separate issues there. We have a long-standing defence relationship with the United States. They are our strategic defence partner. and there's nothing that this government will do that seeks to impede that. Now, in none of the discussions I've had have they linked the two relationships, and I don't see them being connected. We have an issue with the Americans, the way they're applying tariffs. I mean, admittedly, we have the lowest tariffs of any country, but still too high. But we are not at any stage going to link the two. We'll make decisions about our defence interests, of course, based on our national interest. We are spending record amounts of money on our defence. We believe in AUKUS. We want all those submarines built in South Australia by very fine workers. We're going to continue to prosecute that argument, but we're not going to link the two.
All right, let me come to China. The PM was just in China for 5 or 6 days. He had a warm lunch with President Xi Jinping in which he said they each discussed their backgrounds, and the PM said that shows an element of trust. Is that really how Chinese leaders operate in your experience? Is it about personal relationships? I mean, this is a country, as you know better than anybody, that until recently had erected trade blockages against us, put us in the naughty corner. Should we be trusting China?
The significance of the Chinese relationship is they are by far our largest trading partner. If you total up the next 5 trading partners, they still don't count for as much as trade as we do with China. And unlike our relationship with the United States, the trade relationship with China is overwhelmingly in our favour. So last year, $330 billion worth of trade, $100 billion what we bought from the Chinese, $230 billion what they bought from us. Now, compare that with the United States. Our total trade with the United States is only just over $23 billion. So our trade with China is at least 10 times larger than our trade with the United States. And just think for a moment about these tariffs, okay? The American government is imposing tariffs on that $23 billion worth of product we sell into the United States. This government got back $20 billion worth of business. So almost as much as our total trade with the United States we got back in the last 3 years. So our relationship with China is a vital economic relationship. So many jobs. When those impediments were imposed on wine, on barley, on beef, on 12 other products, it very significantly affected the Australian economy. I saw overnight former Prime Minister Morrison said, "Oh, well, you've got to accept the pain." Well, he's not a small businessman trying to make a buck selling wine, or a farmer, or a barley grower. So it had an impact, and we can still put our argument to the Chinese. We can still differ with the Chinese, but we can also stabilise the relationship so that we continue to benefit from that economic relationship. So, what did LBJ say? You can walk and chew gum together. Well, we can do that. We can have an honest relationship with China. We can tell them where we disagree, but we can also have that economic relationship.
In your experience, do the Americans worry about the thickness of the economic connections between Australia and China? Are we likely to come under pressure to limit trade or, for example, not purchase Chinese EVs, for example?
If they're going to go down that track, they haven't told us that yet. And look, President Trump negotiated the agreement with the UK. What was the next country that he did his negotiations with? Well, it was China. And there's already talk that he's going to go and visit China sometime soon. So I don't think you can predict at this point in time where the relationship between the United States and China will end up. All we can do is represent our national interests, And our national interest right now is having a strategic military relationship with the United States and continuing to sell our fantastic products into the Chinese market. That's all we can do right now.
All right, let me go to other parts of the world. Let me come to Europe. You said in your remarks that we're committed to concluding that FTA with the EU. It was reported in June in the Financial Review, I think, that Ursula von der Leyen was going to come to Australia. Actually, I think they said in July to sign that deal. That hasn't happened. We wouldn't mind having Ursula von der Leyen speak at the Lowy Institute, actually, Minister.
I shall organise it.
Thank you for that. Should we expect her soon? What are the main sticking points? How quickly could we do a deal with the Europeans?
Okay. So in the first 3 years of the Albanese government, we had 2 cracks at finalising a free trade agreement. In all honesty, we got quite close to an agreement, but the outstanding issues, we were a long way apart. And that's particularly so in respect to the agriculture sector. We wanted greater access, particularly for our beef and our lamb. The Europeans have a political problem, particularly in places like France, Ireland and Poland, with giving us that greater access, and primarily the agreement fell over because they weren't prepared to give us a better offer. Now, I've had one video conference and one face-to-face meeting with my new Trade Commissioner, Šefčovič from Slovakia. I only employ people now who speak Slovakian, which he's very pleased about, because not many people speak Slovakian. I was arrested in Slovakia, but that's another story. And I've told
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, later on. Yeah. I was with Senator Mark Bishop. There you go. This bloke is the fellow who negotiated the Brexit deal. People said, no, you'll never get an agreement with the UK. And he did. He got that Brexit deal done. So he's highly regarded as a negotiator. And I have a sense that by comparison to the previous occupant of the position, I think we can negotiate with them. Their problem is that late last year, they signed finally, after 15 years of negotiation, signed an agreement with Mercosur, so that's the South American countries, which also has an issue about beef. They told me that they were going to get that agreement approved by the EU Commission in the course of July, and then they're coming to us. That hasn't happened yet. And France, I think, is continuing to oppose that agreement. And if, for instance, Italy joined France in that opposition, then they wouldn't have the 2/3 majority to get it through the European Commission. I think, irrespective of whether that agreement gets up or doesn't get up, we will have a successful negotiation with the EU. I think it's important that those countries that believe in free and fair trade can show the rest of the world it is still possible to reach free trade agreements. So I think there's a national interest on both sides of the equation to get that agreement up, and I'm going to do my level best. It will require some compromises in our negotiations, but I think the imperative here is to show the rest of the world we're fair dinkum about free and open trade, and we can do agreements with other countries.
So Australian industry will have to step up, basically, in the national interest. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying exactly that.
All right. Let me ask you about India. In 2021, we agreed a limited deal, economic cooperation and trade agreement. We haven't managed to get the broader economic cooperation agreement across the line. I think Prime Minister Modi signed a trade deal in London yesterday with Keir Starmer. Obviously, it's in our interest to develop a much closer relationship with India. Update us on the India talks, if you
Yeah, so we were very close to an agreement before the election, and probably if the election had been a week or so later, we might have finalised an agreement. I've got a very good relationship with the Indian Trade Minister, Piyush Goyal. In fact, he's been to our vineyard in the Clare Valley, and I'm told since he's gone back to India, he can't stop talking about Australian food and wine.
Did he drink the Godfather too?
He did,
Yeah.
yes, he did, and that's, I'm told, his favourite Cabernet now. So we've built a really good relationship with him. He just hosted the South Australian Governor, the former head of DFAT, Frances Adamson, and treated her, very respectfully. As you say, they've got an agreement with the UK. That was quite a long time in coming, and really only catches up to where we were a couple of years ago. Their big problem, of course, is that they also face hefty tariffs from the United States, and they're quite focused on that. I think we will get another agreement with India in the very near future, but I think we have to look at India as an incremental growth. They're a democracy. They have constituents that, if they don't like a particular aspect of the agreement, will have genuine protests. I think the way we will get to a final comprehensive agreement with India is in bits and pieces. We've got an agreement now, we'll get an agreement with some other things, and then we'll have to keep talking with them. So I think the India challenge is a longer term one, and we've got to be respectful of their own internal workings, just as they have to be for us.
All right, let me ask you about the WTO. As you know, we hosted the Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala in 2022, and George Minor was key in bringing that together for us. Nobody seems to be talking that much about the WTO at the moment. They're in difficulties ever since President Trump stopped appointing members to the appellate body in its first term. This year they've suspended funding for the organisation. How important is the WTO? What's its future?
Well, it's vital to Australia, and I was in Paris 2 months ago. We had Australia chaired 2 meetings, one of the OECD and one of the WTO. They were the best attended meetings in pretty much the history of the WTO in terms of the seniority of the trade ministers who turned up those meetings. So I wouldn't agree that nobody's focused on the WTO. I think the rest may not be. The Americans turned up too. Greer. I had 2 meetings with Jamison Greer at those meetings. So look, I do think the rest of the countries of the world do see a future for the WTO. You're right, the appellant processes have been blocked by the United States. Interestingly, even under Biden, that wasn't reversed. So it looks now to be, something of a permanent position of both the Republicans and the Democrats. And I was disappointed in that. I thought Gina Raimondo might have been prepared to bite the bullet there. But they weren't. I think there's a future for the WTO. I think we will make progress next year at Cameroon. And the fact that Jamison Greer was there participating is an indication that the Americans have not yet given up. And some of the positions that the Americans are taking give me some confidence that they won't be pulling out of the WTO anytime soon.
All right, let me ask you one domestic question, then I'm going to come to the audience. You mentioned in your remarks that one of the priorities for the government is boosting productivity. I saw that ACTU Secretary Sally McManus blamed sluggish productivity on poor management and said that the perspective of workers has been missing from the debate, which has been too focused on cost cutting. What do you say to that, and what is the answer for Australia's productivity dilemma?
Well, I can tell you, in my space, one answer is a simplified trade system. We have one of the most inefficient systems where people import and export. Sometimes you've got to sign up or fill out as much as 30 forms, pretty much saying all the same thing before you can import or export your products. We are now listed as number 129th least efficient trading countries in terms of getting access into and out of our port. So one area where I'm encouraging the Treasurer to look at is that simplified trade system. Singapore's done it. Very simple system. No reason why Australia can't do it. And I'm going to be working with my cabinet colleagues to make some progress. Well, Sally's, of course, representing the ACTU, representing workers. You know, obviously, if we can improve productivity, you know, by the workers and businesses working together, that's the much preferred position of the Australian government. When Bob Hawke came to government, of course, he initiated the Accord, which was all about, you know, workers getting benefits and companies improving their productivity. I think we can do the same.
All right, who would like to ask a question of the Trade Minister? I can see Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald. I'll give you the first call, Matthew.
Thanks, Mr. Farrell, for your talk today. Matthew Knott from the Sydney Morning Herald. Just a quick two-parter, if I could. On the US front, what is realistically the best that Australia could hope for in a negotiation? No other country in the world has managed to get an exemption from the 10% baseline tariff. Is it fanciful to think we could? Is the best we could hope for a reduction or something happening with the steel and aluminium tariffs? And secondly, would the government support either China and or Taiwan entering the CPTPP?
All right, thank you, Matthew. Look, we haven't given up on reducing that 10% tariff from the United States. When I came to this job 3 years ago, when we had a 220% tariff on Australian wine and an 80% tariff on barley, I was told by people, you'll never ever get that removed. And of course, by the end of last year, we had every impediment and every tariff removed. I think eventually the Americans will come to the realisation that tariffs are an act of self-harm. They're actually pushing up their inflation, pushing up their unemployment, and reducing the retirement benefits of their workers. So I don't think we should give up on the ambition to get those tariffs removed. Let's look at aluminium, right? There's a reason why America imports aluminium from Australia. And to the best of my knowledge, there might be somebody in the room who knows better than me on this, but we haven't, since those tariffs, we haven't reduced the amount of aluminium that we're supplying to the United States. President Trump's argument is, well, the reason I'm imposing these tariffs is because I want companies to produce aluminium in the United States. Well, that's fine, but it's probably 10 or 15 years before you can establish a new aluminium plant and get it up and running. So the immediate effect of what the President has done, he hasn't reduced the amount of aluminium, certainly not coming from Australia, but he's not going to get the benefits of jobs and investment for years and years and years. So in the intervening period, what that means is for every product that the American manufacturers produce, they're now paying a much higher cost, which means when he sells those products overseas, they're now more expensive. Go figure. How does that work? As to China and Taiwan, well, we are chairing the CPTPP. We have just added the United Kingdom for the first time into the group. I think the immediate view of most of the members of that group is that let's settle it down with the UK and then work out who might be the next candidate. And we're already looking at Costa Rica as an additional partner. I think what we need to do is work out a set of criteria and a procedure for adding countries to that agreement. EU have already expressed an interest in joining. As you say, China, Taiwan, many other countries would like to see that agreement. It's a good agreement, very good agreement for Australia. But we need to work through just how we're going to add additional countries to that agreement.
James Crawford from CBUS. Senator Farrell, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I want to take a slightly different step to Matthew. I want to say if things go disastrously wrong with the US negotiations and we don't make any great progress, and I'd love the fact if you were right, I have less faith in the leader of the free world changing his mind on tariffs, unfortunately. But if that doesn't go through, it's great that you're looking to diversify through the India and European free trade agreements, but that sounds incremental. What's the government going to do to make sure that Australian industries don't get left behind if that does take place? What more can you do to support the Australian industry?
If we don't remove tariffs?
Yeah.
Well, what President Trump is saying to us and the rest of the world is, we want to buy less of your products. That's what a tariff does. It reduces the amount of product that you sell into the United States. Now, strangely enough, that actually hasn't happened so far with most Australian products, so that's an interesting fact. But what we have to do is diversify our trading relationship. Now, for instance, that doesn't mean selling anything less into China. I actually think we can sell more product into China, but we've got to find other markets. And that's why India and the EU, the UAE, UK are just so important to our economy. Who would have thought that we are now selling 500% more beef in less than 2 years into the United Kingdom? But no, my job is to find other markets. And here we have Southeast Asia on our doorstep. We used to fly over Southeast Asia to deliver goods to Japan, South Korea and China. And yet here's one of the fastest growing markets in the world, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. Many of the leaders of those countries have studied in Australia. We've provided the education. We're very well received. I married my wife 42 years ago in Manila. So there are 400,000 Filipinos in Australia, about the same number of Vietnamese. Just go through the list. We've got this great opportunity to build business relationships. When I was married 42 years ago, the population of the Philippines was 60 million. When we went back for my wife's dad's birthday, Christmas time, 120 million. So they've increased their population by 60 million in those 40 years, so more than twice the Australian population. The economy of the Philippines growing at 6%. You know, everyone says, oh, how good China is at 5%. Vietnam. So the opportunities are there, and I think we should be more focused on that. And I think superannuation funds can be very helpful in that process. And I think if you can be a little bit more ambitious in where you make your investments into the region, into Indonesia, into the Philippines, into Malaysia, Singapore. Singapore loves doing business with us. So there are so many opportunities in our region that if America says, okay, well, you know, we're going to take less of your product, we can find other markets much closer to home.
I thought one thing that was interesting about that answer, Don, was that a few years ago, all the discussion was about diversifying our trade away from China. You're saying, actually, we can sell more product into China.
So the first thing that the Chinese trade minister did when I met him in Paris a couple of weeks ago, he invited me to the world's largest trade fair, which is his bailiwick. Last year, we took a record number of Australian companies there, 253. On the first day alone, we did $1 billion worth of new business. I said, when I first came to this job, well, our trade relationship, you know, was worth 330 billion. No reason why it can't be 400 billion. Peter Dutton then just topped me, and he said, no, our trade relationship should double to 600 billion. So there are wonderful opportunities. I mean, think about this. The Chinese economy is roughly worth $18 trillion a year. It is growing by 5% a year, so roughly an extra $1 trillion worth of income to Chinese consumers. What do we know when those people move from poverty into the middle class? Well, they want better food, they want better wine, they want a whole lot of other things. So I think there are still opportunities as the middle class in China grow to sell more and more. When I first went to China, you go into a supermarket, used to be an Australian steak next door to an American one. You go there now, there's only Australian steaks there. But we're back to having all your eggs in the one basket. We have to diversify so that if something goes wrong with the Chinese relationship, then we've got alternative markets, or the American market. I mean, who knows, where this, might end. But we have an opportunity now, because our reputation is so good for clean and green product, to export more. And, where's the fastest growing, middle class population? Southeast Asia and India.
I'm going to squeeze in one more question, Don, and I want to come back to Mr. Trump, because you have been involved throughout your career in a lot of tough negotiations with Coles, with Woolies, with Brussels, with Washington. At some point, I presume the Prime Minister is going to meet with President Trump. And you've been in a lot of difficult meetings where you've had to develop a rapport with your counterpart, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything. We've seen some leaders really trip over in the Oval Office. Some get monstered by the President.
Yes.
You've seen others like Mr. Starmer who've been a bit more successful. What would your advice be to your boss about how to deal with someone like Mr. Trump, who prides himself on the art of the deal?
No, the only better negotiator in the Australian Parliament is Prime Minister Albanese. I'm not going to be proffering any advice to him. But look, the reality is, people say, well, how have you built this relationship with China and when went out? I say, look, you treat them the same way that you would like to be treated yourself. And I think that's the trick. I'm sure Prime Minister Albanese will be very successful when he finally gets a face. He's had 2 conversations with him, and okay, it's over the phone. They've both been good conversations, I think, very positive conversation. President Trump thinks fondly of Australia. He has many Australian friends. So I wouldn't be too worried about that face-to-face meeting, and I'm sure that when it happens, it'll be successful, and that, our relationship with the United States is still, heading in the right direction.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Senator Farrell, thank you very much for giving a substantive speech. Thanks for taking our questions.